Okay, I think we'll kick off now. So, my name is Mitch Denny, and this session, ATC 222, I'm going to be presenting on Windows 8 application architecture for enterprises. So, this is a bit of a topic that's near and dear to my heart at the moment. Obviously with Windows 8 being released and Windows 8.1 imminent, a lot of organisations are starting to look at how they deploy Windows 8 within their enterprise. And in this session, I'm going to look at some of the ways you might want to think about the application. So this is an architecture track session. I am going to do some code, but the main thing I want to do here is actually inspire you to think about the kinds of application that you can deploy and how they can sort of work together. I've broken this session down into a couple of different chunks. So the first thing that we're going to look at is contrasting the consumer space with the enterprise space from an application point of view and the different kind of workloads that users have. So what's that functional overlap? I'm just going to try and bring up a couple of example scenarios, and then we're going to quickly look at some of the enhancements in Windows 8.1, which I think are actually relevant for software developers in the enterprise space. The next big thing we're going to look at is what I call the connected architecture. And there's a whole bunch of things that go into this, but first and foremost, there's this concept of application archetypes. So this is the different kinds of applications that you can build Windows 8, and that's kind of like a shorthand for breaking down your app construction problem, which has a whole bunch of benefits. I'll look at how you can then take these applications that have been broken down into smaller pieces and actually reflow them together so you get a nice end user experience. And then we'll look at how embedding into the Windows shell actually makes that experience even more better. So then finally we're going to look at some deployment considerations, and this is sort of more of a, I'll quickly demonstrate side loading, not that that's particularly interesting, it's pretty straightforward. But we'll also talk at some multi-tenant scenarios, which is useful for ISVs. Depending on who's in the room, I may or may not spend a lot of time on that because it seems to be mostly focused on ISV vendors. If you're an enterprise developer, you may not need to deal with the concept of discovery. And then we'll talk briefly about authentication and authorization of enterprise applications and how that works. Okay, so let's look at consumer and enterprise. So when I think about consumer, I think about my sort of general PC consumption habits after work hours. And usually I'm sitting on the couch with my feet up, I'm surfing the web, I'm reading articles. It's very much a consumption-orientated experience for me. It's more about reading rather than contributing. I might be doing things on social media and that kind of stuff, but in general, I'm consuming content. That's a little bit different to my work environment. So this is my dev rig at home. Showing it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's freaking awesome. I love having so many screens. I was thinking I could add like another row at top, but that my wife might think that's a little bit extreme. But secondly, it points out that in the enterprise space, we have a variety of different environments. So this is an environment which is optimized for software development. So I've got lots of different devices, effectively specialist devices. And that's common in the enterprise space as well, where you might have people doing nursing or working in logistics. You're dealing with process workloads with potentially specialist. I mean, none of these devices are particularly specialised, but the combination of the rig represents a specialisation. So where I'm going with that is that there is a distinction between your consumption workload and your enterprise workload. So let's imagine these two worlds. But this is actually a little bit disingenuous because these worlds kind of overlap a little bit. So in reality, we've got this Venn diagram and it's come together, all right? And so we've got this seam in the middle. And this seam in the middle is what I would call the collaborative workload, or this is where the information worker sits. And so I might be a consumer, but I might still use Excel for managing my budget or using Word for typing out resumes and all that kind of stuff. But if in the enterprise space, I might be managing my corporate budget, and I might be doing all sorts of things I probably shouldn't be doing with Excel. So there is this overlap between these two realms. So in the enterprise space, The bit that sits outside that overlap is what I would call the process workload. So I could say that this is where the process workers are, but the reality is that depending on the day, depending on the hour, I might be behaving like an information worker, or I might be behaving like a process worker. Depends on what I'm doing. And just for completeness, we've got the consumption workload or looking at lolcats. So some of the standard industries that you might actually want to operate in with a mobile device in this list, and you'll be able to find examples of process workloads in every single one of these. Okay, so for example, in healthcare, you'll have potentially a nursing application that allows people to record observations instead of the reams of paper that they seem to carry around with them. Healthcare's, I think, ripe for some investment in technology. They seem to spend a lot of money on technology, but not all of it seems to stick. Public safety is one that's near and dear to my heart at the moment. We've been involved with quite a few policing agencies around the country building applications. So most recently we demoed one at a policing conference this week down in Canberra, which we had built with AFP. And that's an application that, I won't demo it, but that's an application that's designed to be used in the field on a tablet device that's mounted in a vehicle. All right, so it's a real process workload where they're doing things like vehicle checks, person checks, pulling cars over and managing custody records. So in that process workload, we're dealing with often mobile scenarios, specialist hardware, that kind of stuff. So when you think about the applications that you're building, you need to start looking at the pattern of usage that you've got. So what kind of environment is the application going to be used in? What kind of user is going to be using it? Because obviously you need to design the software that's appropriate for the user. That might impact your user interface a little bit. What's the context? So take the AFP example for an example. The environment is out in the field in a car, but the context is this is something that needs to be able to pick up and walk out of the car with and stand in front of someone. So can the software be used in that context? Is it productive? And then of course, the combination of all those factors help us decide what kind of devices we should be deploying the software onto. So I had a meeting with an ISV a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about building a tablet application with them and a phone application as well. And we're looking at the features. And I said, okay, well, these are the scenarios you want to support. So it was a line of business application. These are the scenarios you want to support. And, you want to be able to take mobile payments, as an example. Okay, well, they initially wanted to put that on the tablet device, which is fine. But in reality, if you're doing mobile payments, the phone's a better form factor, right? Because you can do that with one hand and take payment. So you're either going to be going for one of the miniaturized Windows devices, so you're starting to see the 7 and 8 inch tablets are arriving on the market, or you're going to shrink it down even further onto a phone. Whereas other scenarios which might involve quite rich mapping and layers and that kind of stuff, that sort of scales up to a tablet. So think about what you're trying to do, the kind of users, where they are, what they're doing, and then figure out what the device is. And that then impacts which version of Windows. Okay? As developers, I guess we get used to either using Windows 8 Pro or Windows 8.1 Pro and Windows 8.1 Enterprise. But they're not the only versions of Windows. So certainly in the enterprise space, it's going to be the Pro or Enterprise that you're using. But on specialist devices, there's actually other builds of Windows. So we've got embedded versions of Windows and industry versions of Windows, and these are kind of cut down. And you get this software when you purchase a particular device, and it comes with this cut down OS preloaded, and you give the vendor your software to preload on the device. So if you're building a kiosk or a POS system, you might be looking at one of these. Okay, so just to sort of whet the appetite, I've got a really simple application here, just to give you some understanding of the kind of app that I'm talking about. I haven't sort of gone and completely implemented this. Is just for a taste. Okay, so if I bring up Visual Studio here, Thanks, Ray. Thank you. Okay, so I've got, we're not going to go through all of this code, we're just going to look at one particular application, but I've got an application which is designed to work in the healthcare space, and it's for dispensing medication. Okay, so I haven't sort of gone through and built all that out, but I'm just sort of got some data on the screen and some device interaction. So if I run up the application, it spins up, oops, if I kill the application, let me just rearrange some things here. Just put that up there. Okay, so I bring up the application, and I've got a list of patients that that I as a nurse need to go and see. Okay, and so Joe Bloggs in West 2, bed A5, has a list of medications. So I'm going to click on that user, and let's say I've got the medication trolley, and I'm going down the hall, and I've got the medications in the trolley, and I've got a PC sitting on top. So that's the context, that's the environment that I'm operating in. Now, one of the things about this application is that when I get into the patient's room and I'm standing by their bed, who's actually ever spent any time at a hospital before? I've certainly spent time at a hospital. One of the things they ask you at hospital is, what drugs are you allergic to, right? Because the hospital dispenses various medications, like pain relief medication, fairly regularly. But some people are allergic to some of those drugs. Codeine's a classic example. And so they give you a red tag, right? But there's only so much information you can put on that red tag, okay? Then they have to go and look it up. So you could actually start to enhance some of the healthcare scenarios by putting little NFC chips on those tags, because the NFC chip is tiny and they're relatively cheap. They're almost, well, I'd say they are really disposable. And you could encode an ID on that, and then when you get to the patient's bed, you could just quickly scan the RFID, the NFC tag, and it would go and fetch the patient's allergy records. So you get the prohibitions. That would actually then work even if the patient was asleep, if you just wanted to get everything set up before you actually woke them up. And some patients obviously aren't terribly good at telling you exactly what they're allergic to. So what I've got on here on the screen is that prompt to actually read the NFC chip. Now, I'll point out I don't build medical software. This is just a hypothetical scenario built up. Now, I didn't have like a wristband NFC chip. You can actually buy little wristband NFC chips relatively cheaply, and you can buy stickers. But I would say every single person in this room has at least 3 or 4 NFC chips in their pocket, at least. If you've got a Nokia 920 phone and you put your phone in your pocket with your wallet, you probably hear your phone going ding, 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 because it's actually detecting all the NFC chips and is trying to figure out whether it should react to it. As it happens, I'm staying over at Jupiter's Casino, and the card that they give you has an NFC chip in it. So that's my demo device for today. I haven't done anything other than make this thing react to the fact that the NFC chip is here, because I didn't want to rewrite the card and lose access to my room. So that's what I'm going to do. So hopefully this works. If this doesn't work, the NFC drivers I've got a Lenovo Helix here. They need to update their drivers for Windows 8.1. The NFC reader kind of works. Okay, so I swiped my NFC chip. In fact, it would have been nice if it made a noise. Let's see if I can make it make some noise. Can we turn up the volume? Hopefully I won't blast everyone. There we go. So that's detecting the NFC chip on the back of the device. And a lot of tablet devices these days are coming out with the NFC readers, and you just encode it in an NDEF format to make it work. So this is an example of the kind of application that you could actually build with a device with relatively simple hardware integration. And there's other things that they've added into Windows 8.1 as well to support integrating with hardware, Bluetooth, USB support, HID support, and we'll get onto those improvements in a second. But I just wanted to illustrate a concept. Okay. Sure, through NFC? Yep, sure. Okay, let's look at the code. Okay, so like I said, this is a really simple example. So if I go into my application here, the first thing we need to look at is in the manifest. So in the manifest file, you have your capabilities list here. And in the capabilities list, you actually have a proximity tick box that you tick. As soon as you do that, some of the peer-to-peer networking and the NFC functionality gets turned on. So if you use the APIs for this without ticking this box, the application will throw an exception, an access denied exception. Okay, and that's pretty standard across the board with Windows 8 applications. Okay, in terms of the code to make that work, so what I've got here is just a simple scan page. So on this scan page, when I bring up the application, I actually get the default proximity device. You can actually bring up pickers and all kinds of things here. So if you've got a device that has multiple proximity devices, you can choose which one you want to use. One of the coolest things I've ever used is it was actually RFID, but it was a glove that you put on, right? And we're using it with a logistics company. And you'd walk up to the goods and you just put your hand on the chip, right? And it would automatically start doing things in the software, and then you just pick it up and walk away, right? So that's an example of appropriate uses of devices to context, because in the logistics business where you're picking things up, you need both hands, right? It's just for pure safety reasons. So what you would do is you'd tap something to the NFC chips wherever they were, or RFID chips in this case, and the software would give audio prompts about what was going on. So if you didn't get the right audio prompt, well then you would grab the device and look at what was going on. Okay, so a picking application, for example, and you could use the voice synth APIs in Windows to tell the person what to do next, for example. Okay, so the next thing we do is when we actually when we bring up the application, we then register to receive the message. So you can see here that as I navigate into the page, I'm wiring up the device arrived event, so that's what detects when the device has been swiped. And then I also subscribe for an NDEF message. So that way, even if you subscribe to the device arrived event, you won't actually get the device arrived event unless you have at least one subscription, even if it's not the subscription that you're actually receiving. It's just some sort of optimization they've got in the system. Anyway, that's basically in principle the way you wire up this proximity stuff. It's actually a pretty simple API. It's way better than working with direct devices. So, okay. I'll put my hotel key in my pocket so I don't lose it. That one there? So that's actually a hub application. So I'm going to show you some of the improvements. So I'll look at some of the new controls, and one of the new controls is a hub app. So that's the first one that came up, and all I've done is apply some very light decoration to it, right? But we're talking really minimal decoration. I've even got some misaligned stuff in there. So, okay, so improvements in Windows 8.1. So there we go. Microsoft just over 12 months ago released Windows 8, so it's to market, and if you were building a modern application, you had a certain amount of surface area that you could work with. Okay, so this is kind of a list or a breakdown of the APIs and components which sit within the Windows 8 API stack. So, you know, you've got things like XAML and HTML5 and CSS as a concept, but you've also got specific APIs for dealing with USB sticks when you plug them in, locality. NFC is in Windows 8, so if you want to use NFC, it's available right now for in production use. And other sensors like gyroscopes and that kind of stuff. Graphics and multimedia. One of the things that I'm a bit of a media junkie, and I really like the Play 2 support. So one of the things you'll see in Windows 8 8.1 is if I'm playing a video, particularly like one of the more modern video formats, so not necessarily Flash, although it sometimes works. You can swipe in from the side, and you can actually send that video feed to your TV, provided it supports it. Right, so you get this really nice media consumption. And the TV, if it supports DLNA, isn't streaming necessarily content from your device. The TVs actually have web services on them, and you send the TV the URL, and the TV downloads it directly off the internet via the URL. Okay? So this works with Channel 9 actually. So if you go to Channel 9, and you know what, in Channel 9 you can select the video format you want to use, change it to HTML5 or something like that, and then start playing the video, and then swipe in from the side and share it to your TV. Right? You've got to have a TV that supports Play to, but there's a little hack you can put into the registry that makes every TV that's download enabled actually show up in that list. So I've got a blog post somewhere on that, so someone remind me and I'll bring it up at the end. Anyway, so like I said, I'm a media junkie. So that's the API surface area for Windows 8. With Windows 8.1, a lot of that surface area actually got updated. So these are slides from build, and so everything got rounded out a little bit more. So that's all a good thing. The contracts got better. We've got some better authentication capabilities. Play 2 actually got some improvements, some significant improvements. But the cool thing is that they really expanded the API surface area with more capabilities. And in particular, look at the devices area. They really improved the ability to integrate with specialized hardware in Windows 8.1. And I think that speaks volumes for where they see the power of modern applications in the enterprise. Whilst Microsoft provides a really good set of information worker tools, they're relying on software developers to provide the process worker workloads. And process worker workloads require specialized devices, and you need the APIs and the modern applications to support that. So you can see where the investments have come in. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is, as a bit of a distraction, I'm just going to jump into some code. We're going to look at a few of the UI enhancements. I can't go through all of them. We just don't have enough time in this session. It would take an entire session to go through it, but I just want to give a bit of a sample. These are some things that I think are pretty cool. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a new project. So I'll just bring up Visual Studio. Screen, again. Okay, bring up Visual Studio, and one of the first things you'll notice is that the Windows Store area has gotten a little bit of treatment. So you can see there you've got your usual templates, your blank app, grid app, split app, so on. But you've also got this concept of a hub application, and that's actually just a template that makes use of a brand new control. That's the one that I showed previously. In fact, all the little demo bits of code that I had there previously on the screen were built using the hub application. And that's useful because a lot of people, when they were building their very first Windows 8 application, the first thing they thought is, this is an application for my business, and I want it to be a little bit like a start screen. Right? I want it to be the gateway for everything else in my application. So I've got this one app that everyone uses and then launches into other things. And so they wanted to make their UI look like the start screen, but there was no control out of the box, and so you had to sort of clutch together a bunch of grid views and deal with layout issues and that kind of stuff. The hub app takes care of all that. So if I create this project, and I bring up the designer, hopefully it works. Basically, the hub application has a big hub control, and it has sections. And each section can have any kind of content it likes, like headers and then your actual content areas. And it's just a way of organising groups of content together, which isn't necessarily grouped items, but it's just grouped functionality. All right, so that's what the hub application, the hub control is for. So if I run the application, then we've got this sort of hub area. So we've got something like a big tile here. We've got the ability to drill in on a particular item. And we've got other arrangements of content along here. So these are all just different sections. Okay, so the hub control is what's in play there. So just looking at the code. If I go into the hub page, bring up the XAML, you can see here that we've got, other than data templates, we've got our main hub element, then we've got a header for the actual hub, so that's kind of like your page tile, so it actually takes up the entire screen really. And then you've got your hub sections, and each section can have a background or a header, and then the actual template for the content that sits within it. Okay, so you can actually data bind to these hubs as well. So that's the hub control, and I think that's pretty cool. The next control or enhancement that I think has really improved things is the app bar. Who's actually done any Windows 8 development in the past? Okay. How have you enjoyed building the app bar? It's awesome fun, right? It's, you know, just getting the pixel alignment right, getting the icons right, just all the tedious little bits and pieces. Windows 8.1 has actually made it pretty much a doddle. And you know, if you've actually built an application and you build the little icons in the app bar, and then you start resizing the app down to that thin version, what do you do with the components? You've got to put all this logic in for hiding particular buttons and that kind of stuff in Windows 8. 8.1, they've got a much more declarative model which takes care of all those concerns for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go onto the page here, and I'm actually going to just quickly slap in a bottom app bar. So for those, you know, the app bar is the thing that comes up from the bottom of the screen when you swipe up or down from the top. So if you go page, bottom app bar, and then into that property, what I'm going to do is inject a command bar. Okay, so a command bar is the new type of app bar that you can use, and I can actually just put in an app bar button, and I can tell it what icon I want to use. So I might want to have just save, and I might want to have some text. I think it might just be content. So content is save, and if I run the application, swipe up from the bottom, there's my save icon. I think I've got the property wrong there. So what's the property? I'm just trying to think of the name. Might be name. Sorry? Yep. Sorry. Thank you. Mental blank. Okay, so you put your label on and bring it up, swipe up from the bottom, and there's your save icon. Okay, so it's taking care of all the layout for you. Okay, so it's kind of a no-brainer now. But one of the things that it does really quite well is if we go into the command bar again, is you can sort of break the command bar up into primary and secondary commands and have multiple of these things, and it'll actually take care of dropping different ones out, in and out. So if I go command bar, primary commands, and then command bar, secondary commands, there we go. And so I might have a couple of primary commands in my application that I want always to be there, no matter what. Make sure these are there. So we'll have add, remove. Basically, that you've got a whole list of icons that you can use. Okay, so you can just look up the documentation. There's like a list yay long of icons where you get the predefined styles kicking into place. And just for good measure, I'm going to create another bunch of app hour buttons. So this one will be a favourite. Now I'll come back to this one in a second because I've got another neat little feature here. So now when I run the application and swipe up, it's put the secondary command over on the other side, which conforms to the standard, the Windows 8 silhouette. All right, so it's kind of helping encourage the proper design pattern. But one of the things that you'd want from a favourite is that favourite to be toggled on. So when you tap it, it stays on. And obviously there'd be data binding behind the scenes here to make this work. So do it again. There we go. So in the app, I can actually change this from a favourite button to a toggle button. So app bar toggle button. There you go. And now when I run the application, we've got the favourite there. Okay, and it stays on. Okay, so in Windows 8 you had these really primitive building blocks, and they're now a bit more sophisticated, a bit more productive, and that's really important in the enterprise development space. I've got a few other little bits and pieces. There's a new search box control inside Windows 8. So one of the things, they're radically overhauling search in Windows 8.1, and they're encouraging people to put a little search box in their applications, which is something they weren't encouraging us to do previously. So that's quite a change. And that search box control has little event hooks that you can use to provide content for the search results. So I'll just create another little application with a basic layout just to demonstrate. Okay, and if we go into, actually on the main page, and I'm going to put in a search box control. There we go, and I'll give it a name. My search. Okay, and if I bring up it looks terrible, so let's put that a grid around the outside, I think. Keyboard challenge today. The canvas won't expand. Okay, and it's probably taking up the entire screen, which is not what I want. Okay, so we've got a search box just in the middle of the screen here. Okay, so at the moment the search box does nothing, but the idea is you put this up in the top right hand corner of your application or somewhere on the screen, and you type in some search results, and just type in a search query, and it should prompt you for some results. But at the moment the search box isn't wired up to anything, so we need to tell it what we want it to display. Right, so you can wire up to events, and then you'd use your API and your code to actually provide the results to populate it. So if I go into the code, so I go to the properties and go to the events. There's a couple of events on this element, so we should have a search suggestions requested. So suggestions requested, so we'll wire up that event. There we go. And so what we get here is we get an event args, and we can actually use the event args to push results in. So you've got your args, and you've got your request, and you've got your search suggestion collection. And on that, there's a bunch of append methods. So let's say as someone is typing something, we want to just suggest a query based on what they've actually put in. So why don't we make it suggest a query which is double the text what they've put in with the space in the middle, just as a quick hack. Okay, so we can type in suggested query equals string format, the space in the middle. So I'm just dummying up some data here, and in the args we have the query text that we can get access to. And so this event would fire multiple times, so you need to be careful what you put in here. We're not going to go off and send off copious amounts of web service requests every single time someone puts in a character. You might delay this a little bit, okay? Use some async coding patterns, for example. And then we're just going to append a query suggestion. And so a query suggestion is actually just another string of text. And once we've got that done, I can run the application. Now, we're going to see this API a little bit later on. But if I type in test, it's now suggesting test as a query. Okay. So let's look at some of the other parts of the API. The other thing we can do is actually provide some actual results. So if we go request, search, suggestion, collection, append, we can go append result, suggestion, and we then pass in text, detail, a tag, and the tag's kind of just like an ID that you can use to find that record again when it's actually selected. It's back to the good old days of VB. And then you can also provide a stream for the icon, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is get the file icon. So random access stream, I think it's a random access stream. I've always got to check the type name, random access stream reference. So you use that class, and we're going to create it from URI. And tip, if you're wanting some random images for your application, just as you're building out your prototypes, you can go to a website that I found, which is called http://lorumpixel.com, and you could say I want a 30 by 30 pixel of a person. All right, and it will generate an image. There's another one which I find, if you want something that's a little bit plainer, you can go placehold.it, and you go 30 by 30, and then you can actually put in other information, change colours, and even put in text. But that's kind of a different service. There's quite a few of these services out there which actually really improve your prototyping speed. So we're creating a stream reference there. So I'll go stream, and then what I'm going to do is inject that into the suggestion. So I'm going to say Joe Blogs, and then Redmond, WA. We have a tag, so this would probably be some kind of internal ID from the underlying database or something like that. So it might be something like, person 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you've got the stream and the alternative image text. So loading, for example. So now when I run the application, it's always going to suggest that person. Obviously, you'd hook that into a database to actually make it a real application. If I type in test, you can see that Joe Blogs is being suggested, and there's his picture. So this search box control is really quite handy for building that in-app search functionality. And it's quite different from the search charm approach that they've got. It's some of the same plumbing in there, but when you use the search charm, what would happen is it would actually interrupt the user flow, whereas with the search box, they figured that it's less intrusive. So that's kind of why they're making that change. You know, in Windows 8, if you do a search for people, suddenly everything else that you've got on the screen disappears. There's actually a search pane that we'll see a little bit later on, which even if you don't have a search box, you can still implement search in your application, but instead of actually changing the view within the application, it puts the results in the search pane, and it has exactly the same API as this. So if you know how to do this, you know how to work with the new search system as well. But we'll look at that a little bit later. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to do was the settings. Do I have the... Okay, so let's see if I've got the code here for that. So I'm going to run this application. It's another simple app, another blank app. So implementing settings flyouts was sometimes a little bit tedious, a little bit more code involved than you'd want to do. Settings are pretty important in apps. So you've got here a settings flyout. Okay, so there's now a base flyout that you can use, and there's a way of injecting that into that panel. So I'll just show you the way that works. So here I've got a settings flyout page that I've created, and you can create a new one just by going in, going new item, and there should be a settings flyout somewhere here in the list. Settings flyout. And so that's kind of a template that's sort of pre-configured to look pretty decent, to match the silhouette of a Windows application. And then in the application startup code, you wire up to an event on the settings pane. So you say, given the current view, when a command is requested, so when a settings command specifically is requested, give me the event. And then all you do is you create these settings command objects and inject them into the collection. And the settings commands can kind of do whatever you want, right? So you can actually make this go and launch IE if you wanted to. But in this case, what we're doing is actually just making it show the flyout. Okay, so that's a little enhancement they've put in. So anyway, that's just a taste of some of the UI enhancements they've added. They've done some stuff with WebView as well, which addresses some rendering issues that they've got there, as well as some general performance stuff as well. So you can actually embed 3D graphics via the web view control, for example, which is pretty cool. But that's basically what I wanted to show there. Okay. All right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was this concept of a connected architecture, and I've got a little bit of code here, but what I really wanted to show you was first the concept and then the practicalities of implementing it. So the concept of, well, my concept of a connected architecture is breaking applications down into clusters of applications, and this is especially true of enterprise applications. So when you go and build an application for your enterprise, you've usually got some sort of deployment mechanism for your app. So if you can push one app, why don't you push 10 apps, right? And instead of actually building the ability to look up a person in every single application, why don't you build just a single person lookup application, or a single a location application or mapping application that all the other apps can actually plug into. And so we talk about having clusters of applications that work together, and then how do you flow them together, and how do you make those applications embed into the shell. So the connected architecture is not a framework, it's just a way of thinking about your app design. So application clusters, really the first thing you have to understand there is not about the concept of having multiple applications, but what kind of applications you're going to have. So I look at the Windows 8 world as having 3 distinct kinds of applications, and we'll dive into the detail about those. The first is what I would call a hub application, and not to be confused with the new hub control. That's not necessarily a correlation there. But the idea is that you've got a single application which is deployed on every single device in your organisation. It's the first and last application that everyone uses every day. And when they bring up the apps, they have one screen. It has a list of all their tasks they've got to do, and they press on that task and they might launch into another app. That app might also surface some BI information, access to corporate policies and all of that kind of stuff. The next kind of application is what I would call a task or role-specific application. So this is a much more meaty application. It's got some real business functionality other than sort of just consumption, and that's where your work gets done. That's your process workload application. So that might be the policing application or a nursing application or a logistics app that's used in the field for picking things. And then the third kind of application is what I call a gateway application. So this is a veneer, a very thin veneer, put on top of an existing system for data that you just want to expose to Windows. So let's say that you have a CRM system and you want everyone in the organisation to be able to look up a customer record and give them a call. Okay? So you would have a gateway application which implements the contact picker contract, which allows everyone to go into email, click the contact, select the CRM system, and then pick the customer's contact record, and then send them an email or even make a phone call, right? It doesn't have any real functionality beyond just exposing the data to the Windows shell. So that's why I call it a gateway application to something else. These 3 kinds of applications are really the ingredients you need to build out your Windows 8 enterprise app strategy. There's not much that you can't service with those 3 major concepts. So, I've been through that. Okay. So here's a hub application. So it's a single tile sitting on the screen. I've just used the storyboarding stuff from Visual Studio. I've plugged into PowerPoint just to work through this. So you go into the hub application, you swipe across, so you've got access to your BI, your internal information. You can imagine using the hub control that I used just previously to implement this kind of thing. In fact, it's really good that this stuff came out because doing this kind of thing used to be a bit tedious. And you've got your notifications. And the idea is you could click on a notification and jump into another app, or you could click on some BI and dive into some BI records. So then you get onto your role or task-specific application. So it's got a different profile of usage entirely. So there's a bunch of different applications. So this is getting towards that cluster of application concept. And we've got a retail auditing application. So if I go into the application, I've got a map of audits that I need to do nearby, so I might be the retail auditor, and I can click on one of those, and up comes a little pop-up, some sort of flyout, and it says, okay, well, you can start the audit. So I go start the audit, I dive directly into that record, and then I can go through the various criteria and mark things on and off. So this is a real business application as opposed to just consumption. I'm actually I've got some data that I've read down, but I'm actually updating the system as well. So we're now moving away from that center of the information worker universe towards a process worker workload. Okay, so I'll just flick through some of these screens. Okay, so there we go, get there eventually. If you didn't figure out, I'm actually a huge fan of the storyboarding stuff inside Visual Studio. It's great if you want to go to a customer and explain the way the UI is going to work, but you don't want to have to build out the UI in one go. So the nice thing about implementing these things as separate applications is each application can be as simple or as complex as you want. Whereas if we had to build one application that did all of these things, the footprint of the application might start to become quite large in a significant organisation. But also the architecture within the application required to support all of that functionality becomes quite difficult to deal with. So breaking it down has a whole bunch of benefits. Gateway applications, as I said, it's all about exposing other systems. You integrate via the shell via contracts. So here's a simple example. This is the facilities management application. And like most industrial organisations, you've got some kind of safety concerns, and that's a really hot topic at the moment in property development, resources, that kind of stuff. And so we might have a logistics facility here. The gate's been damaged. Someone had a big night out and ran their car into the gate. And so someone's reporting it to the facilities team so that can be addressed because it's off its hinges, it's not safe. So they've taken a photo using the Windows 8 application, and they've then swiped in the sharing charm. At this point, they haven't actually brought up the facilities management application at all, right? That's not really the thing that the users think about. They don't think about the app, they just think about the content. And then they select the urgent maintenance icon from the share charm on the side of the screen. And that launches that application with a share view on the side of the screen, and they put in some descriptions. They might note it as a safety issue, and then hit send, and off it goes to the server. So coming back to it, we're talking here about the difference between a big monolithic application, a lot of micro applications, and that has huge deployment implications. If you're going to do micro applications, you've got to have a mechanism for deploying multiple apps. In the enterprise space, that means using things like SCCM or Intune or any other sort of mobile device management technology that supports Windows 8 sideloading. We'll look at that in a little bit later on. But it also has maintainability implications. Because the complexity of the software might be less on a per application basis, the apps themselves might be easier to maintain, but you've got more apps to maintain. So if you make some fundamental change to the way that you authenticate the application or you call to the back end, you've got multiple apps that you've got to update. And so this is where you start to come into the detailed architecture of the software, using portable class libraries to have common network access code that you can then reuse between all your apps. So if you do make a change, every app is impacted. But the other thing that's really interesting here is that you've got some technology choice implications. As you probably know, in Windows 8, you've got two predominant UI stacks that you can work with. You can use HTML and JavaScript and CSS, or you can use XAML, and with XAML you've got the C++ or C# option. If you break your applications down into smaller chunks, you can use the technology which is most appropriate for the job. So sometimes HTML and JavaScript is a good choice, particularly if you've got some specialist JavaScript libraries that you want to use. But sometimes XAML and C# is the better choice. So breaking it down actually gives you this option. Okay. So the next thing I want to look at is protocol activation. Sorry, go. Archetypes?
do is you can add on. So one of the add-ons you can add on a lot of other applications. So one of the add-on in the layer is, let's say, it's called planning alert. So basically, in any suburb, you want to see wherever people have applied for a subdivision, so you can add that add-on.
Yep.
That is a main application, but depending on your interest, you can add on another application on top of it.
Yep.
Is that hub application architecture you're talking about, or depending on the workflow?
No. So what I would that could be a consumer application or a business application. So that kind of application would be useful in a lot of different ways. But that's an example of an application which lies somewhere in between sort of hub and gateway. In reality, it's really just a visualization surface, and you just pull in multiple feeds for the layers on top. So I was talking to a customer this week, and they've got something very similar to that where they can just plug in different layers, and it's pretty cool actually. But it's a gateway application in terms of it's sitting on top of a stack of other technologies which just reads in all this information. But it's also pluggable, right? So that plugin model is actually part of the application itself. It's not necessarily related to this application architects concept. That's a distinct property of the application itself. And it's kind of one of the things I'm saying is that by breaking the applications up, you're then free to come up with the internal application architecture which makes the most sense for that particular app, right? So the app, for a simple application, I might just kludge it together in the simplest way possible. But for something like that, I might, go full on and set up IOC containers and MVVM models and all that kind of stuff, because it makes sense to invest that in that application. So that's a really good example of how you can scale your investment on a per app basis.
How easy is it to talk between the micro apps? One updates another sort of thing?
So I'm going to look at that with protocol activation, but it's not a full answer. There is obviously there is an issue. Each app lives in its own sandbox, okay? And so in order to make the applications talk together, what's really happening is they're talking to some other central location. So you might have a common library, PCL, that's shared between the two of them that provides access to the data, but the cache for those applications would be independent of each other because there's no shared state between applications. You might be able to hack something in there with protocol activation where you pass across handles for files and that kind of stuff, but that could get pretty kludgy pretty quickly. So it's actually something I'd love to see them set up. It's a really interesting observation. If you look at on Windows 8, you've got the mail and the calendar and the people application. You've got those. I think there's another one. What's the other application that's part of that group? Anyway, at least those three applications. They're actually one package. So when you get an update for those apps, it updates all three of those applications. And if you look at the application, all of the code, all of the executables are actually in the one directory in the package directory. So the other option you've got, and it's not well supported in the tools today, the other option you've got is building one package which has multiple separate applications which all share the same data directories. But like I said, you're going to be manually coding manifests to make that work. There's all going to be all sorts of kludges to make that work. I'm not even sure if it's supported in the store. So the platform certainly supports it, so you might get away with it in the enterprise scenario. I haven't experimented with it myself, but I do know that the mail application does it. It's built into Windows. Okay, so protocol activation. Does everyone know what a URL is? Yeah, okay. So most people are familiar with things like HTTP, FTP, URLs, right? That's all pretty straightforward. But URLs are just a form of a URI, and we can just come up with just about any form of URI that we want. And so the first part of a URL or a URI is this thing called a scheme. So we can come out with our own schemes and register our application so that if someone hits a link to that URI scheme, our application is notified about it and can launch in and do some deep linking. And that's a technique we can exploit to take all of these micro applications and link them together. Okay? So we're going to actually have a quick look at that. Okay, so with protocol activation, the idea is that you've got the Trans-RASCAL Activity Hub, and then you've got these different URIs which can launch into different apps. Okay, so the nice thing is that you can do that with your own applications, but a lot of the applications, apologise for the colour there, I didn't realise it was so washed out. You can actually launch into other applications using URI schemes as well. So let's say that you want to have some trivial mapping in your application, so you're not wanting to do layers or anything like that, but you just want to do directions and that kind of thing. You can use the Bing Maps URI scheme to launch directly from a record in your application into Bing Maps, and it just brings it up, and you can actually do things like routing from your current location to there. Great for logistics applications, right? Because you're just using the Bing and the Nokia Here platform underneath it covers to route you in traffic, and you don't need to worry about implementing any of that then. So what I'm going to do is, and so it also works for things like Link. So if you want your application to be able to initiate video conferencing sessions, then you can actually do that as well. So we've got protocol activation and user flow. And so what I'm going to do is just jump into a little sample that I've got pre-canned here. Yep. Okay, I'll get there eventually. Where did I go? Demos. Okay. So if I look at protocol activation here, in this app, I've got two separate apps, and I'm just going to jump from one to the other. So it's just a quick example of how that works. So I've talked about the principle now. I'm just going to show you the basics of the code. And if I go into the manifest, I've got the source code. I've got a source app and I've got a destination app. In the destination app, I have a manifest, and in that manifest, I specify a declaration, which is protocol, and that's where I specify the scheme. So that's basically the scheme. So I've created a scheme which starts with destination-app, and then it can have whatever it wants after it. My application is responsible for making sense of that. And then in my source app, what I have is a button, the click event handle, so it's very simple code here. Go to definition, there we go. Which creates a URI, so I'm just whacking one together there. And I use the launcher API, which is just a static class inside Windows RT, and I launch with the URI async. And what happens is it just goes straight into the Windows plumbing and says, do whatever you've got to do to launch this application. So this could literally bring up a desktop application in some cases, but it could also bring up another Metro application. So in this case, there's only one implementer. And if there's multiple applications that implement this scheme, you get to choose which one it is as well. The user. So remember, you're running a sandbox. So at the end of the day, our applications are slave to the whims of the user. In an enterprise scenario, if you want to lock that down, you kind of do that with policy, and you make sure certain things can't register. So. Okay, so now I'm just going to spin this up. So I've got my source app and I've got my destination app. I'm just going to spin up the source app. I think I've got the destination app there already. And imagine there's some sort of relevant icon in my application, but I click the button and it's just bringing up the app on the side there and crashing for some reason. I don't know what I did there. Crashing, all right. But it's launching the application. I've obviously got a bug in my code somewhere. If I change this to a link, for example, sorry, link 15. Got to get the URL right. So you can integrate with Skype, for example, and actually initialize phone calls as well. There's all sorts of things you can do here. And what have I done? Sorry guys, demo fail. I think something's going on. Okay, so there's my default link client is actually the desktop client. So as I said, you can actually launch into desktop applications as well. And I think the extension to force it to go to the Metro version of Link is MLX. So could be wrong, but there we go. So that's the Metro version of the application. So just pick the URI scheme that makes most sense. So you can sort of imagine an application in the field where you need to make a phone call over your link connection, and that works quite nicely. Okay. So just in the interest of time, we'll keep moving along. Okay, the next thing is shell contracts. So shell contracts are, well, when you specify your capabilities and your declarations. Your declarations in particular are about implementing contracts for the most part. So there's a whole bunch of contracts inside Windows 8 applications where you can plug into the Windows shell. So sharing, we saw an example of that, search, protocol, file type associations, file pickers, contact pickers, and all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to show you a couple of these. First thing we're going to look at is the contact picker. And one of the things I've noticed is there's actually lots of there's lots of code samples in the Windows 8.1. There's just like a 100 megabyte download you can pull down that has samples for all of this stuff. But they kind of complicate the samples a little bit by having scenarios. So what I'm trying to do here is just focus on the minimum stuff you've got to do to make it work. So what I've got here is something that supports being a contact picker. So I'm going to deploy this application. There we go. And then instead of actually launching it here, what I'm actually going to do is go into the mail application and create an email, and I'm going to do a contact picker from there. So that's what a contact picker is. So go into mail and send a new email. See Blair's tweeting over there. And I get a contact picker. And what's actually happened here is it's taken a page out of my application and embedded it in the contact picker. So a bit of my application is running inside the people application, or the mail application. One the same thing. And I'm just going to press the click me button, and what's happening is it's putting the contact details down the bottom, and when I hit add, then I've got a contact record there. Okay? So that's the contact picker contract. And the way it works is, if I go into the code, when I get the application activated, I get to inspect what kind of activation it is. And in this case, it's a contact picker activation. So I cast the event args to a contact picker activated event args, and then I instantiate the page that I want to use, and I've just implemented a method on the page, which just tucks away some of the implementation detail, which basically keeps a reference to the contact picker UI. So this is a reference to the bit on the outside of my page, right? Because I need to be able to communicate with that bit on the outside. I need to say, hey, the user's done something on my bit, and here's the contact record that you need. So then what I do is I just slap the contact picker, my page, into the current view, and then I activate it. Okay? And at that point, the UI is then stable. And then as the button is clicked, so I've got a button here called one and only contact, I then instantiate this contact class, which has various properties, and I hand that back to the contact picker UI. And that's when you click the button, that's why you get the little icon showing up down the bottom. So that's your minimum implementation of a contact picker. That's the mechanism that you use to make it work. Okay. Okay, the next one's search contract. Search contract has kind of been a little bit crippled with Windows 8.1. What's actually happened is that they've replaced the search. So one of my favourite, believe it or not, this is really embarrassing. Is this session recorded? No, I won't tell you who this is then. So the idea is that you can type in the name of a famous person, you get some curated results back from Bing. And the idea is in the long run, your application will be able to inject some results in here. So there's a whole new indexing layer inside Windows 8. We don't have the time to actually get the index all primed here, but the idea is that you can actually, when your application is running, is pull down data from the server and then actually insert it onto the local machine index so it shows up in the search results on the PC here. but the search contract still does exist in the application. And so let's say that you don't want to use the search box control, but you want to use the swipe in search charm, you can still inject into that model. So if I, you can tell I do web development. If I jump into the demo here, GC search contract. Okay. So I've got a search contract. So that model where you use the search charm and you type in there and it starts changing the view inside your application, that's gone now. You don't do that anymore. It works with Windows 8. Doesn't work with Windows 8.1. Right, the messages don't come through. So I've got a declaration here that says my application supports search. So it will show up in the search charm, but the search results will instead show up in the search list. So I've got my application here. It's really exciting. And I pull in the search charm, I select search, and I can search everywhere, and that will launch the Bing results if I hit go. But I can actually type in things here. So if I go, I'll just figure out what my search term is. So in the app, so in the application, what I do is I get a handle for the search pane. So my view itself, or my page itself, has a reference to that search pane that's on the side. And then as someone types in the results there, I get suggestions requested, okay? And that's my opportunity to populate that search suggestion collection. So that's the same thing that we're using with the search box. So if you know how to use search box, you know how to use this. It's basically the same mechanism. And so if I go into search, type in whatever, that's one of the suggestions that's come through, right? So it's some of these suggestions could be coming from Bing. So this is all the new search platform as well. So there's all sorts of things. Got to be careful with some things you've got to search on. You might get some interesting results. Okay, so that's effectively the search contract now. You don't really have the really deep plumbing that you used to have, where you used to have to react to the app launch, or the app activation, and look at the kind, and then bring up a different panel. It's kind of been simplified dramatically. And the reason that's been done is because when you go into the search results, you can't pick what application you want to search in. So the app, when I go in here, this searches across everything. I can go in here and say I want to search just my application, but I can't pick any other application because, like you could in the previous search window. Okay.
If I'm using search today, Windows 8.
Yep.
Does it then break?
They've got I think what happens is that it defaults to searching within the existing application. So I think that's the way it's intended to work. So there's the path. It's not bad breakage, because what you're really losing is the ability to pick another application from that search list, which I actually kind of liked, to be honest. I thought that was pretty cool. But what I found was that people, were having trouble finding the search charm, so hence the reason for the search box. But also, when they did find the search charm, 9 times out of 10 they were just searching either everything or within the current application. So that's the reason for the change. So they've got sort of some graceful degradation, but there are some things you can do within your application today to make it work better for sure. So for example, when you go to search, you're going to go to search everywhere. Well, if you put a little search icon in your Windows 8 application today, you can trigger the search panel to come out and pre-select your current application. So you get the consistency of behavior from 8 to 8.1. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so I've got 5 minutes. Okay, so we're going to whip through this pretty quickly. Side loading. So side loading is basically taking your AppX package and installing it onto a machine. And in the enterprise space, you need to think about how you're going to manage these applications, because you can't just take the random dev cert that you get and use that to deploy to all your machines, because that certificate expires every 30 days. So unless you want to deploy your application every 30 days, which is awesome if you're doing agile software development, but not so great if you've got longer dev cycles, longer release cycles. So you need to make sure you've got a proper signing certificate to sign the applications, and then you can install it onto domain joined machines, or you can get side loading keys from Microsoft. And there's a couple of various device management tools out there today which take some of the hassle out of deploying onto large fleets of machines. So that's the Windows Intune or SCCM. So Windows Intune is more for you to bring your own device space, and SCCM is used in quite a few enterprises already. And I think there's like an updated version of SCCM. I'm not an SCCM expert, so I'm more of a consumer of that technology when I build apps. The interesting thing there is that a lot of people, the first thing they say is, I want to have an app store for my company. Okay? So if you're going to build an app store for your company, then what you need to do is, if you're using Windows Intune, there's actually an app you can download which is a company app store, and it connects to Windows Intune, and you publish your AppX packages up on Windows Intune, and it will take care of the deployment down onto the machine. So it's a two-part thing. You've got a modern application and an agent that runs on the machine. Okay, and Windows Intune does more than just deploy applications. It does some monitoring and policy application stuff. SCCM, if you want to build your own app store, you'd have a custom application you develop which spoke to the SCCM APIs on the back end, which then triggered the deployment of an application down through your network. So that's if you wanted to go down the path of building your own store. So side loading via the command line. Anyone who attended my previous session was seeing I'm a huge fan of PowerShell. And one of the commands that you've actually got here is add AppX package. So when you deploy a package onto your local machine, when you sideload it, what's effectively happening here is you're running this AppX package command. Now the nice thing about working with Visual Studio is if you don't want to remember the commands, because to be honest, I never do. So let's say we want to package this little fella up. We go in, well, firstly I'll stop the application. We go into the store menu here, and you create your app packages, and we'll say, no, we don't want to go into the Windows Store. And you've got to make sure you set all your certificates and everything appropriately here before you do this, but we'll just quickly stamp one out. And then you get your AppX packages here. And basically, assuming you've got your PowerShell policy set correctly, you can just double click on this and it'll actually take care of the installation for you, take care of the side loading. So in theory, what you could actually do is sign with a different certificate and just change, because this actually does some certificate installation as well, rip all the guts out of that and just use that as your side loading mechanism. Make sense? That means you could potentially side load via an MSI or something like that as well if you needed to. Preferably, I'd probably go with something like SCCM or Windows Intune. But okay, so that's side loading. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just quickly remove the application.
It's still very expensive. Remember when it first came out, it seemed like it was going to be quite expensive to push out to multiple machines.
For Intune?
I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, one of the companies.
I don't know about the licensing, but usually it's something. I mean, it's usually something enterprises have already. Any organisation that's managing lots of desktops, therefore having a deployment problem, will have some sort of device management capability. You could potentially push it out through any number of ways. I quite like Intune. I think bring your own device is going to be becoming an increasingly popular option for a lot of businesses. So I'm going to run this command with PowerShell, and we'll see a little bit of action here. I've got to run it as an admin. Okay. PowerShell. City demos, city ATC. Time's up. Oh, okay, I'm going to have to wrap up quickly. If you want to see me actually run that PowerShell command, then come up and I'll show you afterwards. Okay, so Multi-tenant scenarios. So quickly loop through this. Who works for an ISV again? 2 people. Okay. Very quickly, if you're deploying an application as an ISV, you have to decide whether you're going to publish it to the store or you're going to give customers AppX packages. If you're going to give customers AppX packages, that's fine. You might be able to potentially produce a custom build for them that has all the configuration pre-baked into the app. But if you're publishing through the store and your app is connecting to an on-premise backend service, then you need to figure out how to find that backend service. And so that's the process of discovery. So you might want to either have the ability for the user to specifically type in the connection to your backend into the application and store that, or you could do things like allow the user to type in their email address, then use DNS on the suffix to actually locate the internal server. So you can do some DNS lookup, so that's that auto discovery mechanism. And that's really what I wanted to cover off with that. And when you do that, you get into the situation where you can then support both on-premise and cloud. So you go and you look up the DNS for a TXT record or a service record, and it points to the actual location of the server that your application is going to connect to, and then you start doing your authentication. Okay, so if you want to know more about that, ask me, and there's a few tricks that you need to do. You go from explicit configuration to implicit based on things like email address. And authentication and authorization. There's simple and complex options. The simple option for enterprise application is just enable enterprise authentication in the declarations of the app. And that way your app can pass through your network credentials and it's just standard AD authentication all the way through. If you're working in a bring your own device world, well then what you need to do is think about how you can do auth with things like OAuth and that kind of stuff. So you're dealing with security tokens and you're using those to talk to the backend service. So that way someone outside the network can authenticate and then use that credential to access the API. So, and that's the impact of network topology. So in summary, we've covered a couple of things, but it's really important to understand your users. It's really important to understand the scenarios that you're supporting, so the context that the application is being used in. Take those architectural concepts, the concept of application clusters, those application archetypes, protocol activation for linking between apps and implementing the shell contracts, and use that to make a nice cohesive user experience instead of building one big monolithic application. And then consider the challenges of deployment up front when you're developing the application. Understand how you're going to get it out to users and how you're going to get out updates as well. Thank you.